great pleasure to be joined today with Josemar Gonzalez Lizarraga. So Josemar Gonzalez Lizarraga is a multimedia artist, organizer, activist from the San Diego-Tijuana border region. And his work has not only been featured at the San Diego-Tijuana border region, it's been featured around the world, right? In various places here in the United States, in Japan, just to name a few of the places. He is of the many initiatives that Josemar has implemented. One of those initiatives is the BorderClick program at the San Diego-Tijuana border region. But also, he is a creator of. He's formed part in a movie, right? Couple movies. And he's also been awarded the California Art Council. He's a fellow at the California Arts Council this 21-22 year. His last installation called Transcending Perceptions is currently up to view at the Liberty Art Station. Liberty Station. And his latest film is called Apocatastasis, and we're going to learn more about what that is because I don't know what that means. But that's just a little bit of Josemar. Also, a little bit about Josemar is that he is just somebody with a big heart that really cares about his community, that cares about the people in the community, and more specifically, how people in the borderlands are being at times affected by these border enforcing policies that we've talked about, facilities like the ICE concentration centers, for example, and he uses his work to amplify these injustices. So that's just a little bit about Josemar, but we're going to learn more about who Josemar is through his work. So with no further ado, I will now pass on the mic.
Bueno, hi, hola. Thank you for allowing me. I puedo publicar en inglés, español, it's fine, right? Like, it's all good? All right. If you have a question, feel free to stop me. I'm going to keep this real relaxed. I'm not going to get too intense. But, well, maybe I'll get a little bit intense. But I kind of like talking to Vanessa and thinking about like what you guys are learning and what she wants me to talk about and kind of help you understand. I'm just an artist and I do work, and I just want to show you how I became what I think is supposed to be an artist. I didn't do it on purpose, but it kind of just went about and how that happened. So I'm going to talk first about who I am, a little about myself, so you can understand the context from where I'm coming from, and that'll help you understand why I kind of do the work that I do and how. Yeah. So I was born in San Diego. And I grew up like part of my life between San Diego and Tijuana, just crossing the border since the first time I crossed the border, I was 5 years old. And I'm 34 right now. I was born in 1988. So when that was happening, when I used to cross the border back during those times, you didn't need anything to cross. All you had to say was like, oh, I'm a US citizen, and that was enough. Nobody asked any questions. So it was very, very different. I grew up in two brothers, my two parents, and my parents from Sinaloa. So we would go and come back to Sinaloa, and I lived this like very transport experience before I understood it was a transport experience, or before I think anybody had ever called it something like that. But at least my father understood how important it was to be in that geographical region, being in Tijuana, being in San Diego, being able to go and come back, and they wanted me to have an education in the US. So I would cross the border every day to school. I lived in Tijuana, and then I would cross every day. I did it for a long time, until I was like maybe, I want to say like 8 or 9 years old, I think, is when we moved, not permanently, but like I would spend most of the time in the US, and then I would go to Tijuana like maybe on the weekends, or like every other weekend I would go to Tijuana, and I would go and come back. And in 2001, when 9/11 happened, I don't know if some of you I'm sure remember 9/11, that was a very intense moment worldwide, and at the border, it was the first time that I saw the border as something other than like because to me it was just like a stop at any other place, like a rest stop. Like when I would go to Sinaloa, it would be the same thing. I'd see a rest stop on the street, we'd get off, get gas, get food, whatever. And I never understood the border as something beyond that. I didn't know that it was this thing that divided two different countries, two different worlds, two different cultures, like all this I never understood. As a young kid, I would see people living in the border. What I mean in the border, like literally in the canal. I don't know if you've been in Tijuana, but you can see all the people that are unfortunately living right next to the wall. A lot of these people are people who come from South America and all over the world, and they get stuck in Tijuana trying to cross into the U.S. and they end up living right there right next to the wall. So I would always see these people, and I would always see these injustices. But as a kid, you don't think about that. It's kind of like the way life was. And then after 9/11, for the first time, I saw the militarization of the border and the wall, and I started understanding, like, oh shit, this is something, pardon my language, this is something more than just a crossing. Like, this is something that's beyond this region. This is something international. And I'm seeing in the news everything that happened, the terrorist attacks, like all the media coverage of what was happening and the fear mongering that was happening. Me as a kid, I was scared. And then I started seeing I remember when it happened, I was in San Diego, and then my dad called me in the morning, and he was so afraid that something was going to happen in the U.S., that we were not going to be able to leave the U.S., that he made sure that we left at Tijuana that day. Because he was like, no, what if something happens, you guys get stuck and you can't never come back. And my father, during that time, he couldn't cross to the U.S. So I remember that and thinking about it, and I was like, why am I not able to go? Like, what? Like, kind of did it like for the first time. It started making a lot of sense, and yeah. So that's kind of like when I started to understand that there was a border. That was important. That was a very critical moment in my life, and I just kept living. And I just kept going. Kept going. Did everything I had to do. Went to school. I got kicked out of high school for doing a bunch of stuff, and I was living like I don't know how many people here transporter and go and come back, but just crossing, like when that changed, I went from crossing the border for like 30 minutes to 2 hours of wait. Everything suddenly changed. It was so different. It was so exhausting having to go to school. When I ended up like being in Tijuana and being in one place, it was just so much for me. I couldn't handle it. Just like me, there were so many students who couldn't do it. So what would I do? I would cross the border. 9/11 was like when I was in middle school. Then high school, I would cross the border, and the last thing I wanted to do was to be in school. After 2-3 hours of being at the border, I would just go somewhere else. So that's what ended up happening, and I ended up getting kicked out of school for doing that, for not being in school. I just couldn't take it. I couldn't deal with it. I was just so exhausted. And later on, like, I understood that it was supposed to be like that the system wanted me to not go to school. So one less Mexican. So if I don't cross the border, I don't make it there, then I'm not in school. One less guy, so I got kicked out of high school. And a lot of things happened in between. And when I figured out that like when I was able to graduate and I started to think of like what am I going to do with my life? Like I need to make money. I need to do something. Art was definitely not an option. It wasn't something that I thought about at all. I had never met an artist in my life, and I had this idea of what I thought an artist was. And kind of was something I want you all to learn is I want to demystify this idea of what an artist is supposed to be. Because we get all these ideas, especially now with social media and all this amount of content that we get bombarded with, you don't even get to choose what you see nowadays. The algorithm, yes, kind of thinks for you a little bit, but they throw you a lot of things on purpose. So we get confused on what we think art really is. We think that any influencer is an artist. No, we think that any influencer, or whatever you want to call it, like we have these weird ideas of what art is or being an artist is, and then before that, we had all the, like, when I tell somebody that I'm an artist, which was for a long time I couldn't call myself an artist, they automatically think that I'm a painter. Like, oh, so you paint? Which I do, but not really. Like, that's not where I go. Like, you're not gonna see any paintings in my work, for sure. I do that for me. But I want you to get an idea of kind of like, I want you to demystify and think about like what being an artist or living an artist life is. That's why I'm giving you a little bit of background. So I graduated from high school. I went to Southwestern Community College. There I tried to study darkroom photography, which I failed. I failed my darkroom photography class because I was experimenting more with the way I was doing photography, the type of development of the film that I was doing. I just wanted to have more fun. And my photography professor was very he was very academic, very technical, and he wanted things to be a very specific. The blacks have to be blacks and the whites have to be whites, because it's black and white film photography, and we were developing, and develop a process. So I remember that, and he ended up I ended up failing the class because I couldn't do it the way he wanted it. Anyways, I didn't graduate from there. I started studying astronomy and a bunch of other random stuff, and I didn't know what to do. And because of life choices that I was making, trying to find something that I liked, and just kind of not trying to stick to the norm, just doing what I thought would make me happy, but at the same time I was doing odd jobs. So I was working a lot of retail jobs, like at Levi's, and then I was working at Levi's for a long time. I worked at Old Navy. I worked at a call center. I did so much stuff just to make money, because I didn't want to work for I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to do something that made me happy and allowed me to make music. Something I really wanted to do. That's the only thing that made me happy. I met a friend who kind of convinced me he thought that I was really creative and that I was a good speaker. And he was a graphic designer. And he's like, dude, maybe you should study some design. You really like images, and I see you speak very well. You seem like a good communicator. Maybe you should try design. So when I decided to study multimedia design, and that's when a lot of things changed. I started, I forgot this big part. A lot of stuff happened during that time in my life, and because of the transporter lifestyle that I was living, I was experiencing and seeing a lot of violence around me. A lot of violence. A lot of my friends that I was in school with, many of them ended up in prison. Some of them dead. I lost family because of violence, and all of this violence was happening at the border because of the drug trade. I had a lot of friends who were selling drugs. I was selling drugs at some point. A lot of things were happening around me that I didn't understand were so rooted in violence. I didn't see it like violence because culturally it just didn't make sense to me at that time. And at that exact moment when I decided to study media arts, my brother, he lost his life through violence at the border, and all this violence that was created through the drug trade. And that to me blew my mind, and I asked myself a very intense question. Was my brother happy when he died? He was 22, I was 21. And my answer was no, he was not happy at all. And that broke my heart. That was that to me, I couldn't fathom the idea that this person that I loved had died and was not happy. And I was am I happy? I asked myself, am I happy? My answer was no, I'm not happy. So I was from this day on, I'm gonna do everything in my power to be happy. Whatever I can, whatever that is. I don't care, I'm gonna be happy, because just like my brother, I could die the next day. So I decided to be happy, and when I was studying in school, I decided not to have a corporate job, and I wanted to work for nonprofits. I wanted to do something that gave back and that made me happy, because I was doing odd corporate jobs as a designer. I was working for this financial consulting firm, and I was their designer, and I did a bunch of stuff for them, and I was only making the rich richer and the poor poorer. That's all I saw. I had to sign a contract where there was a lot of things I couldn't say publicly because of the type of negotiations that they were doing, trans-border negotiations, which was interesting enough because they were in Tijuana, they were doing all this U.S.-Mexico trade, and during that time I started working for a nonprofit called the Project, and I started there as a designer. It's a photo-based nonprofit. Ironically, like I said, I built photography and then ended up working for a photo-based organization where I did a bunch of photography and I was working as a designer and just looking at photos and looking at art, and I started to be influenced by what I was seeing. A lot of the work that they did was around immigration, a lot of work with people in detention centers, youth in and out of prison. So when I saw this kind of stuff, I started to identify with the stories that I was seeing, stories about violence, stories about young kids losing their family members just like me. And I was like, oh my God, I found something that's calling me, you know? And this was just something that I wasn't searching for it. I just happened to be there and saw it for myself. And then that's when I met an artist called Shinpei Takeda, who you'll see a little bit more about. And he's a very interesting character. He's a Japanese born in Japan, right now lives in Germany, and when I met him, he was living in Tijuana. It was the weirdest thing to see this Japanese man speaking Spanish like Tijuanero, but like Tijuana style, and I was like, oh shit, this was fucking speak Spanish. Like, I was tripping, I was young, I was 23, and I couldn't, like, it was just weird to me. It blew my mind to meet this person, and he told me I'm an artist, and I was like, you're an artist? Like, what is that? Like, what does it mean for you to be an artist? And he showed me a world. He just started like taking me everywhere, just showing me around and taking me to places to help him like do stuff in galleries and museums. And then I started to understand, okay, being an artist is not this idea that I had, that you were like glamorous idea of being an artist, that you're showing work all over in every gallery everywhere, and that you're rich, no? And that you're supposed to be famous. And he opened up this world to this bunch of artists in Tijuana that I suddenly had access to. These amazing artists like Daniel Robanova, Meli Barragan, Julio Orozco, these crazy gnarly artists that I invite you to check out their work. They're amazing. And so, Shinpei took me to do the first installation ever that I got the opportunity to work with Shinpei. This is Shin's installation, but I helped him build it, and this was in Japan. It's all made of thread from Oaxaca. So we flew the thread all the way from Oaxaca to Tijuana, and from Tijuana to Japan, which is a trip. And so I don't know how long it must have taken us to put this. Like every single thread, we had to like, these are very, very, very thin. Like every single one, we had to thread it, and then all the way to the end. It took us like 2 weeks to put it together. Kind of get us an idea of how big it is. You'll see right now. You see all the details, so much work. So that's when I started to understand art as something beyond just being in a wall. You kind of see the magnitude of this thing, no? And that's Shinpei. That's Shinpei right here. That's very And it's the first art installation I ever got to work on. And when I was in Japan and doing the work and thinking about like being this Japanese Mexican person and try to understand how he saw art and the way culture built who he was, like this clash of cultures made him into this person, I started to reflect. And that day, that trip that I did with him was the first time that somebody called me an artist. We were at the Mexican consulate and we were doing like a sort of like a presentation, and I was introduced like an artist, international artist, and I was like, I'm an artist? Is this being an artist? And from there, when I came back to Tijuana, I was just ready to do so much more. Like my creativity exploded, and I was like, I started feeling confident after I came back, and I started experimenting more with my art practice. And I did this installation while I was working at the nonprofit that I was working in. I put way more effort, started focusing a lot, and created this art installation at the San Diego International Airport. So this installation is photographs. I took a lot of these photographs. I didn't take all of them. I took a lot.